to make all the mistakes and learn how to do it a different way and get it right. You gotta learn from somebody else's mistakes. That's why I speak at things like this, because I've made most of the mistakes that are possible to be made in beekeeping. And maybe something I say will keep you from falling in the same ditch that I fell in. So we're all in the ditch of beekeeping. So we're all guilty of that. And maybe poor judgment on our part. But Larry wanted me to talk just a little bit about 2 new products that are available. One of them is for small hive beetles, and this does not affect adult hive beetles directly. It does affect hive beetle larvae directly. It will kill hive beetle larvae, but it's not harmful to bees. It's not toxic. Bees are not attracted to it. In fact, they're kind of repelled by it. But it's called Grandivo. It's a probiotic. You can get it off the internet, off Amazon. Probably within the next year or so, you'll be able to get it from Strong Microbials. But right now, you have to get it off the internet. And it's a powder that you just sprinkle on top of the frames, or on the bottom board, or on the ground around the hive. Small hive beetle larvae are attracted to it. They consume it and they die. And it is a probiotic. It's not a toxin. It's something that multiplies in the midgut of the small hive beetle, similar to the way foul brood spores multiply in the midgut of bees, bee larvae. And it kills the small hive beetle larvae. It won't do anything about that first infestation. Chances are your hive is going to be destroyed by the hive beetle larvae before this stuff kills them. But it will stop those larvae from pupating and infesting other hives as adult hive beetles. It'll break the life cycle of the hive beetles. Grandivo was designed actually for squash bugs, to kill the larvae of squash bugs that squash borers, and it worked on them. It also works on just about all beetle larvae are attracted to it. So, but the adults are not. It won't do anything for the adults. Cost 5 pounds costs $145, $150. But 5 pounds goes a long way. You can get it in smaller quantities. The other product is a product called Brood Safe, and it is for American foul brood. Brood Safe is the first thing that we've ever had available that will actually kill American foul brood spores. Brood Safe is it's actually a creature called a phage, P-H-A-G-E. There's lots of different kind of phages. It's a natural occurring organism, and they look like something off Star Wars. If you Google it and get a picture of it, and they look like something I would not want sitting out in my yard. But they're so tiny. They're really, really, really tiny. Phages are a lot like a virus, but they're not a virus. They're an organism, but they operate a lot like a virus. And every type of phage feeds on a particular bacteria. And University of Brigham Young and University of Nevada collaborated on a study. It started about 2012 of trying to identify the particular phage that fed on Pinnaticellus larvae, which is American foul brood. That's a bacteria that causes American foul brood. And they found that particular phage. They found that phage in 2013. It took them a year to isolate the right phage that fed on American foul brood bacteria. But then it took another 3 years before they were able to put that into a product, a delivery system, that the phage would stay alive, and you could actually put it in a hive and it would stay alive until it was needed. And they're dehydrated, and they reanimate. They come back to life when a honeybee ingests, that they're fed into the hive with powdered sugar. They're mixed with powdered sugar. The honeybees ingest that in removing it. They get phages in their midgut. The phages multiply in their midgut. The honeybees are feeding the larvae these phages. And the phages also pass through the honeybees and pretty much go throughout the hive. And it's a process. It don't happen like in a day or in 2 days. It's a process. It takes weeks for it to completely run its course. But these phages seek out American foul brood spores. See, it's easy to kill American foul brood bacteria. Bleach will kill American foul brood bacteria, but it will not kill the spores. The spores go dormant, and when they're in the dormant state, the only thing that kill them is radiation and extreme heat. And by the time you kill the spores, you've killed everything else in the hive. You know, you've melted your hive or burned it up or killed all the bees. But these phages actually consume the spores. They're attracted to the spores, so that's what they eat. And they consume the spores, and the American foul brood is gone. It's the first thing that has ever been available that actually works, and it has been proven to work on active infestations as well as working as a preventative. It costs about $1 a hive to treat your hive. It's recommended that you treat it once in the spring, once in the fall, and you just dust it just like you used to terramycin. But it's not a drug. You can use this at any time of year with Honey Superzone, and so far it's been highly effective. Highly is in 100%. But I'm reluctant to say that anything is 100%. The things that I would think are 100% usually turn out not to be, so I don't say that. But so far it's been that effective. It's a good thing to have in your toolbox. Yes, sir.
Using it for preventative or cure?
Both. It'll do either one. It will clean up. They first tested it as a cure on hives that had active American foul brood working in the hive. I know a fellow that knows a fellow that knows a fellow that was actually in the program. Actually, it wasn't quite that far removed, but I don't know the man personally. That was at Brigham Young. But friend of a friend was at the house this last spring, and he said, you've heard me talk about Gary. I said, yeah. He said, I'm going to call him and let him talk to you about this brood safe stuff. And I said, okay. I said, what's he know about it? He said, well, he's one of the people that's in the program that was testing it. I said, okay. So he called him. They were at my house, and he called, and I talked to the man, and I said, I'd like to get in on this study. He said, well, you can. There's still some places open. He said, we have this available on the market right now to state agrists and to universities and extension services. It's available right now, but there's still work to be done. He said, this isn't the only phage that we're working on, indicating that there's other phages that they're hoping to bring on that will work on the European foul brood and other bacterial things. But I said, well, how do you get in on this American foul brood study? And he said, well, first you got to have American foul brood. And I said, well, I'll just let you do that, and I'll be happy just taking your word for it. Then I don't really want in on this study that bad. But he went on to explain that he had a 24 hive bee yard, and 6 of the hives had active American foul brood, and 2 of them were pretty bad. But they were all still queen right, and they all still had some healthy brood in it. He said they treated them with phages one time, and within 2 brood cycles, the hives were clean, and they survived. So clean, I asked him if clean, looking at it and saying nothing looks like American foul brood, he said, no, we sent them to the lab. He said there was no American foul brood traceable in the comb. So, that, all I know is to kind of be like a parrot with this stuff, because I don't have any personal experience with it. Thank goodness I don't have American foul brood to use it on. But, it's supposed to work. It's not that, it's expensive to buy it, but you use so little of it at a time in treatment that it's not expensive per treatment. Yes, ma'am.
Is it gonna be regulated like the antibiotics are?
Nope.
No?
This is a living creature. It's not a, it's like the Grand Evo. It's not toxic. It's not an antibiotic. It's not a drug. It's not, it'd be the equivalent of,
Red-X.
dumping, yeah, it'd be the equivalent of Dipel. You know, Dipel, if you're familiar with chemicals, Dipel, most organic associations allow the use of Dipel because it's Bacillus thuringiensis. And it's not a chemical, it's a living thing. And it'd be the equivalent of dumping mushroom spores in your hive, hoping to get the desired effect from it. And there is a little bit of study going on in that area too, but I'm not privy to much information on that. But those are two things that are fairly new products. It really doesn't matter to me one way or the other what you think of your particular state apiarist or your extension services, or it doesn't matter to me how you treat your hives. It's okay. You can do what you want to with it. You can think what you want to about your officers, but Tammy Horn was one of the very first state apiarists that actually got some of that from Brigham Young University. She got some of that in early 2016, treated a lot of hives in eastern Kentucky where they had a serious outbreak of American foul brood and cleared it up. And I say that because 25 miles from where I live, 3 months ago, there was an American foul brood outbreak on the University of Tennessee Martin campus. In their bee yard, they burned it. Our state apiarist, 3 years earlier, treated the same thing in East Kentucky and saved it. So I'm kind of happy with the attitude that whatever faults she may have, she's on top of stuff like that. And she has that available. If you need some brood safe and you call her, she'll bring it to you. She's got it in her office, and she probably won't even charge you for it, because American foul brood is one thing you don't want to get started anymore. But don't be afraid of it, because we got something to work on now. Those are the two things that are fairly new that a lot of people are not aware of. But keep that in
Would it
mind.
be worth using as a preventative kit, spring and fall?
Well, yeah, it would be worth using, but I'm not gonna use it, not as a preventative. I've got some of it. If anybody around my end of Kentucky, see, I live in the part of Kentucky that the rest of the state don't recognize. Most people don't realize that west of the Tennessee River wasn't even a part of the state for 20 years after the rest of you guys were Kentucky. But anyway, we're kind of happy with not being recognized. The less government knows about you, the better off you are. But anyway, anybody in our end of the state, I've got that stuff to help people make sure that they don't have an American foul brood outbreak, because that gets over into everybody's stuff. But I'm not going to use it as a preventative, just because I know it'll work as a curative. I mean, that's the main reason that I'm not going to use it as a preventative. If I were to have an outbreak of American foul brood, you can believe I'd treat every hive I've got with it. So in that case, I would be using it as a preventative and a curative all at the same time. That's just the tack that I plan to take with it. It's not regulated. You can use it with Honey Super Zone. It's just a good tool.
What's the shelf life of this living organism?
As long as you keep it in a cool, dry place, it has a long shelf life. You can look at it if you Google brood safe, it'll come up and all the information that's necessary is on the label, and it'd be a big picture of the label, and it tells what temperature range that it will be okay at. You don't want to put it in the freezer, but you don't want to set it out in the sun either. Just a cool, dry place, and it has a long shelf life. Probably not as long as I'd want it to have, but because I'm cheap. But it's a good product. Good product to have. Be a good product for a bee club to have, just for all the members to dip out of. Everybody go together and buy a 5-pound bag. It won't hurt you too bad. You know, everybody that's in here put in $10 toward a 5-pound bag. It's expensive to buy a 5-pound bag, but a 5-pound bag will treat probably 1,000 hives.
Do we have an American, I know American Foulbrood was further to the south. Do we have it around here?
Probably not. Now, I say that, you don't have active American Foulbrood around here. I will guarantee that there's American Foulbrood spores in most everybody's hives. But it has to come to a critical mass before that it actually becomes active. Everything has to line up exactly right for American Foulbrood to actually blow up in a hive. A larva, there's only a 4-hour window that the midgut of the larva will accept an American Foulbrood spore, or a European Foulbrood spore, or a Nosema spore. All three of those reproduce by spores, and they all three have to stick in the midgut lining of a larva in order to gestate. And the 4 hours between, I think it's between 48 hours old and 52 hours old. Before 48 hours, the midgut lining is not developed in the honeybee larva, and the spores pass right through. After 52 hours, the midgut lining is so developed that it digests everything, and it goes through. But in that 4-hour window, those spores can stick in the midgut lining, and if enough spores stick, it takes at least 12 spores of American Foulbrood spores to stick in the midgut lining to actually infest that one larva. But at that, you just have one larva that's infested or infected, whichever way you want to say it. And that one larva will die in the prepupal stage. And it creates a lot of spores in that decayed prepupa. Those spores have to get out and find their way into the midgut at exactly the right time of other larvae in order to make other larvae infected. So you can see that you may have one cell of American Foulbrood and never have any more in the hive. But American Foulbrood, Penepocelis larva, that particular bacteria is in a lot of nature. It's just that it don't gain that critical mass in a colony of bees in a brood frame to blow up into a real problem, except in certain circumstances. Once it does get to be a big problem, it becomes exponential really quick. And that's when we notice it. We don't notice it when it's one cell. We notice it when it's 20 or 30 cells on one frame, or we don't notice it until the whole thing is just too far gone to even think about saving with anything. So, no, we have American Foulbrood spores. We don't have active Foulbrood around here. East of I-75 is where the majority of American foul breeds found, active cases, right now, in Kentucky and Tennessee. Kentucky don't have that many active cases now, just because of the proactive stance that Tammy had. Tennessee has a lot of active cases, still. And by the way, that's where UTM got their American foul breed. They had a student from East Tennessee that moved 6 hives on the campus. Those 6 hives were infected. His parents had property in Stewart County, Tennessee, and they had a friend that had property in Henry County, Tennessee. And so he divided the hives, 2 at UT Martin, 2 at his mom and dad's place in Stewart County, and 2 at Henry County. Those are all 6 of the hives that were infected. None of the hives that were raised at UTM were infected. So, you know, I think they call that collateral damage.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's the story on that stuff. And I don't mind talking as much as you want to talk about American foul brood. I'm not afraid of American foul brood because I've had 2 rounds of it in 30 years, and I survived both of them. It was not pleasant, but I survived both of them, and if you know how to deal with it and you have the spine to do it, which means at that time it's burning your hives, there's no reason to be afraid. Yes, sir.
Been thinking about that since I learned about it. American foul brood spores gets in the wood,
Yeah.
so I've never heard this question asked. I help cure the bees, what about the spores in the wood?
The phages seek it out. Now, the phages can't move outside. It's not like they're going to go across the landscape eating up all the American foul brood, but they will consume all the foul brood within that hive. In the wood, phages are smaller than foul brood spores. They'll find the foul brood and consume it. I had that question too.
I don't see how they could. I've been thinking about it the last month and a half, 2 months. How can they be transmitted over to the wood? They don't have legs.
No, neither do the spores. It's kind of like alien life, you know. It's probably not bipedal.
I'm just trying to figure out how they can get over to the wood.
They get there. They're airborne for one thing. Spores and the phages are airborne.
If it'll be airborne, it'll be blown over by the bees.
Mhm. Yeah, but they will consume, once all of the foul brood spores are consumed, they run out of food, they die. So that's why you have to retreat. Not retreat like run away, but retreat in the fall and spring. So that's why they recommend that. I'm not too big on spending a lot of money on stuff that I don't have to spend money on. Shoes and clothing in particular, you can tell that. But same way with treatments. If I ain't gotta use it, I'm not gonna use it. Yes, ma'am.
How do you apply the
Grand Devo and Brood Safe are both applied exactly the same. Sprinkle it on top of frames. But I think they recommend a tablespoon across each end bar. Across each end of the frames. On one super. In between first and second stories.
Putting it on, you said it kills squash bugs. What about
You can put it on the ground. I mean, when it was first designed, Grand Devo, it was designed to be sprinkled around the squash plants, worked into the ground. So,
They need to be killed spores.
yeah, till around the squash plant or hole around it, and put that stuff on the ground, hoe it into the ground. That's how it's supposed to be applied. It kills the larvae that become the squash borer. They're more attractive to the Grand Devo. Grand Devo stinks too. I mean, it smells like something that a bug would be attracted to come eat. It's nasty. That's why I didn't bring any, because I didn't want to ride in a cab with a Jeep all the way up here with it.
Well, I've got both again. Ruth Safe and the Grand Evo, I've used the Grand Evo, but it does stink bad. And it's real, like the bag, it's not like flour, it just gets airborne.
Yeah, it's all over you, you can't
Yeah.
keep from breathing, it gets in your
Yeah.
mouth, yeah, it's bad.
Yeah.
Roy,
If that's alive, what kind of shelf life you got? I mean, is there any need getting it and having it in case you want it?
yeah, it has a good shelf life, it's alive, but it's dormant. It's dormant because it's dehydrated, and it won't rehydrate until it gets in the midgut of the beef. And it does have to be kept in a specific range of temperatures. I don't remember off the top of my head what those are, but it's not too cold, it's not too hot. It's like 55 to 90 degrees or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. The next thing is Nozema. You hadn't really heard a lot about Nozema because of so many other things that are killing bees. When there wasn't anything else killing bees, Nozema was a big deal. Nozema is, it's a problem that just kind of accentuates other problems. It's a stressor that adds to the stresses in a hive, and a honeybee colony can handle one severe stress pretty good. It can handle 2 moderate stresses, okay, but you can have 3 stressors that are almost minor, and the colony can't handle it. They'll just crash. If you have 1 major stress and 2 other minor stressors, your hive's probably not going to survive it. That's why you have to stay on top of this stuff. Now, beekeeping is way harder now than it was when I first started keeping bees. And I never kept bees in the age before mites. So I don't know what it's, well, I'll take that back. I do know what it's like to not have to treat bees because I had hives in Northern Ontario for 4 years. And there was no mites there, and it was amazing. And it's like I imagined it was keeping bees here in the 1960s. But didn't have to do anything to them, just put more boxes on them, try to keep them from swarming, and everything just went great, except for the bears. That was kind of a drawback, but in fact, that's why I brought what I had left back here, when you could still come across the border with them this way. But we didn't have all this stuff, and it's a product of globalism. Everything that we've got that's killing our bees, we brought it here. Not on purpose, but in cargo ships and containers, swarms of bees that would light in a container, on a container, get on an ocean-going barge, come across the ocean, settle in a port, usually in Florida, and wind up in a migratory beekeeper's operation, and go everywhere. That's how we got tracheomites in 1985. That's how we got varroa mites in 87. That's how we got Nozema cerana. And we don't even know when we got that. Nobody knew we had Nozema cerana until somebody said, well, this don't look like apis. And it don't act like apis. 2 kinds of Nozema that we have, Nozema apis and Nozema cerana. Cerana comes from Asia, which is where varroa mites and tracheomites came from. But cerana does not present itself the same way apis does. Used to say if you have a bunch of defecation on the outside of the hive, you know you got Nozema, because bees, it's almost like they have dysentery. They can't fly. They really need to go to the bathroom. They're crawling and going to the bathroom at the same time, defecating at the same time, and they leave streaks on the outside of the hive. They're weak. They can't fly, but they gotta go. Nozema cerana is not like that. Nozema cerana is one term for it is the dry Nozema. Dry Nozema. There's no feces involved. But it multiplies in the midgut of the bee and causes just as many problems as Nosema apis. Nosema apis has been outcompeted by Nosema cerana. It's rare to see for me. I mean, people that look at this all the time, they probably see a lot of apis. I don't see hardly any. But just about every sample of bees that I look at under a microscope will have some cerana in it. Maybe not a bad infestation, but there'll be some in it. Apis looks like links of hot dogs linked together. And cerana looks like a wad of frog eggs. It's two totally different looks. The cerana, a lot of times, will be all separate, just all over the screen, or all over the paint. In the microscope, they're kind of oval shaped, but these are living creatures. They don't stay oval shaped. They may be kind of round, go to an oval, kind of elongate a little bit, go back to an oval. Apis always looks like a needle bearing, is what it reminds me of. You know, I grew up working on stuff, and I've knocked enough U-joints out to see needle bearings scattered all over the floor. That's what apis looks like to me. Needle bearings out of a U-joint.
It's bacteria?
Nosema is hard to classify. If you say it's this, then somebody on the other side of the room will say, well, I read it's this. And I would have to say, well, you're right, and you're right too. There's no great agreement on exactly what Nosema is. It used to be called a fungus because a fungicide would stop it. Fumagillin was a fungicide. And the best description of Nosema is that it's a fungus that reproduces by spores, or it's a microsporidian that reproduces like a fungus does. Those are the best descriptions of Nosema. Nosema is like, it's not an amoeba or a paramecium, but it's like an amoeba or a paramecium. It's a microsporidian, but sporidian means it reproduces by spores. And the spores are if you notice, all the bad stuff in beehives reproduces by spores. And that's one reason there's been some research. It's usually this research done pretty much by the fringe of beekeeping researchers that aren't really that accepted, that are looking at other spore-producing things that might combat Nosema. Mushrooms, I mentioned mushroom spores earlier, but the mycelium from mushrooms. I don't know if it works or not. You can't get fumagillin anymore. It's not that it's illegal, and it's not that everybody decided, well, we're just not going to sell it because you can't use fumagillin when there's honey superzone, so we're not going to sell it. It's because the only place that made fumagillin said, we're not making any money at this, we're done. It's not made anymore. You can't get it because it's not there. If you find fumagillin, it was made somewhere else other than Canada or the United States. And I'm not even sure where that would be. But it's not available. That's not something we can use anymore. So then the question becomes, what do you do if you got Nosema? Well,
Are
first,
there any other fungicides that are made that don't treat it?
yeah, there's a lot of fungicides that are treated, none of them are legal.
Took your bees to watermelons.
Yeah, that's right. Any high-powered fungicide will treat Nosema, but it may have a detrimental effect on your bees too, because fungicides, they don't start. They're not lactophages. They don't eat through one host and say, well,
Stop
the rest of this stuff tastes awful, we're not eating it, we'll just die. But, fungicides are not like that. Fungicides, once they finish killing what they're designed to kill, the fungus that they're designed to kill, then they settle in other things, and one thing that they do is keep pollen from fermenting. They stop the fermentation process of pollen, which means that the protein, the amino acids in pollen, when the pollen's fresh, they're only good for days, a few days, maybe 2 weeks. And that's arbitrary, but just for the sake of argument, 2 weeks. If that pollen is fermented, that's a way of preserving the amino acid content in the pollen. So the bees can ferment the pollen and they can have a good protein source for 3-4 months. Bee bread, that's what's called bee bread, fermented pollen. But bee bread is not good forever. It eventually loses its amino acid content. If that bee bread, if that pollen will not ferment, then there's no amino acid content available to the bees. That's what fungicides do. High-powered fungicides. All fungicides are not equal. Fumagillin would not do that. It would kill the spores. It would kill the microsporidium. Spores are really hard to kill. The spores of Nosema cerana are a lot like, in some ways, they're a lot like the spores of American foul brood, because they will go dormant and they will stay alive for a really long time in a comb. The things that stay alive in a comb are Israeli acute paralysis virus, stays alive for a really long time in a comb. Nosema cerana spores stay alive a really long time, and a really long time means that nobody's really put a year figure on it yet. And American foul brood spores. Those 3 types of spores survive for a really long length, a lot of years, evidently. But they know American foul brood spores will live about 80 years. They don't know if it'll live any more than that, because that's the oldest sample that anybody had the forethought to save. So nobody really knows about Nosema cerana or about Israeli acute paralysis virus either. But the question still remains, what are you going to do about Nosema? First, you got to know that you've got it. There's 3 things that cause honeybees to disconnect their wings. The K-wing syndrome, where bees, their wings will look like this instead of like this. Each side, the wings look like that. And that's called K-wing. Bees disconnect their wings when they're uncomfortable. If they have tracheal mites, they can't breathe. They're uncomfortable. They disconnect their wings trying to get their breath better. If they have acute paralysis or any of the paralysis viruses, their equilibrium is affected. They can't, they're trying to keep their balance, so they disconnect their wings to give more stability. If they have Nosema, they disconnect their wings because it's like having stomach cramps. They're uncomfortable. If you see bees in your hive that have disconnected wings, you can bet that you got one of those 3 things going on in the hive. And you can rule out paralysis if you don't see any bees that are shaking or look really slick and shiny. You can see slick, shiny bees look like somebody had put oil on them or something, but they're still alive. Or if they're shaking or wobbly, then you can be pretty sure that that K-wing was caused by paralysis. That's a virus. You can't do anything about a virus. All you can do is do everything you can to keep the hive alive long enough that they will outproduce the virus. And that's really all you can do for a virus. But if they have Nosema, when we had Fumagillin, you could treat with fumagillin, and it would stop the nosema. But when the nosema came back, it would spike in population. And it's not really that different than having 20 coyotes on a 1,000-acre farm, and every year you have 20 coyotes on a 1,000-acre farm until you kill 10 of them, and then you have 30 coyotes because they reproduce at a higher rate. Everything in nature serves the purpose of one thing, reproduction. And they're gonna do whatever organism is gonna do what it can to reproduce itself. And the more you take out of the environment, the more they're gonna reproduce. That's just nature. Same way with nosema. I helped a pretty big beekeeper do a project on nosema several years ago when Saranna first got to be a catchword. And what he found, I wasn't doing any of the cool stuff. I was catching bees and mashing them. You know, he was doing the cool stuff. He was the smart one. I was the lackey. But what he found was nosema Saranna populations did like this all the time, and they would go somewhere between 50,000 and 200,000 spores, or 200,000 counts, and they would just wobble like that all the time, even if you didn't treat them. But if you treated them and knocked that 50 or 75,000 count down to 10,000, about one brood cycle later, it would spike to a couple of million. It's almost like you just flipped a switch and the nosema said, man, they're killing us. We're gonna have to get a big army here. And it became obvious to him anyway that it was pointless to try to, unless you were willing to keep treating over and over and over and over. It was pointless to actually use something to try to kill nosema Saranna. So he used fumagillin. He raised bees and sold bees. That was his whole business. So he used fumagillin. He was probably the number one consumer of it until they quit making it. So he makes his own witch's brew now, puts in the feed, and it works. Not quite as good as fumagillin, but it works. What can common people do for nosema Saranna? Put enough good probiotics in the midgut of the bee that it crowds out the bad ones. Probiotics are a good thing to feed bees. And you can get the probiotics from Strong Microbials, ProDFM. It's a good product. But I've already established that I'm really cheap, and that's kind of expensive. And ProDFM is the best product to use for that. A good substitute is the probiotics that you get at some place like Tractor Supply for horses. It has the majority of the good probiotics has to do with lactose and lactic acid. And there's other small additions in ProDFM, but if you can flood the midgut of the bee with good probiotics and microorganisms, then you have a better chance of crowding out the nosema spores. The bees are likely to do better. Well, bees will do better with that. Just feed it in sugar water, sugar syrup. That's all you have to do with it. Roy?
How often do you want to give that to them?
Depends on how benevolent you are to the probiotic industry. I mean, I don't have a calendar formula to say you need to give it to them in April, then again in July.
Well, is it good to give it to them, say, a week or 2 weeks after you treated it for mites?
You don't want to give probiotics to a hive directly following treatment with antibiotics, because that's you're working against yourself if you do that. The antibiotics are going to counteract the probiotics. And you're not gonna get the effect that you want. Wait at least 3 weeks. If you're gonna treat with tetracycline or Tylan, wait 1 brood cycle after treating, and then feed probiotics. The best time to feed probiotics is going into the fall. In fall or going into the winter. Your bees will be a lot healthier in the winter if you feed probiotics going into the winter. Coming out of the spring and going into the winter. Yes, sir.
Just talking about going to Tractor Supply, I bought Pro DFM just to see what was in it, but it cost me about $36. And after I seen what was in it, I went to Rural King, just looked at the horse lactic acid, same stuff. Great big bag for half the cost.
Yeah. Yeah, you're cheap too. You can mix that in your sugar water to feed the bees. Yeah. And the probiotics, you know, it's kind of pointless to mix terramycin with sugar water, because if the bees store that, you lose that antibiotic effect. After about 2 weeks, your antibiotic effect is gone from terramycin. If they store it, don't consume it for 2 weeks, you've wasted your time and money. But the probiotics are different. Probiotics are there, those microorganisms are there, as long as they're in the feed. If the bees store that, they still get the benefit of it if they eat it 6 months later, or 3 months, or 2 months later. So you can put it in your sugar water, and they'll consume. They're going to consume some of what they take in, even if they're spitting it back out in the cell.
How much you put in sugar water?
How much? You just mix it like you would for a horse. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just look at them like little bitty horses. Yeah.
You can buy all kinds of stuff at Rural King or Tractor Supply, the same stuff you pay high dollar for.
Yeah, electrolytes, these are things that are good additives to bee feed, especially coming out of the spring and going into the winter. Electrolytes and vitamin complex that you give chickens, those are really good additives to put in sugar water.
You can buy a great big bag of Kumquats there too.
Yeah, corral, yeah, they kill small hive beetles and kill you too if you put it on your bologna. You know, those are the things that there's always questions about. You know, what if we get those things? What are we going to do about it? We can't get fumagillin. Try to keep the bees healthy, rather than being reactive. You have to be proactive, and that's really the whole thing. That it's popular now to just let everything ride. Don't do anything until you have a problem. Now, the issue I have with that is that by the time you see that you've got a problem, it's too late to fix it. Especially if you're at this time of year, the queens are slowing down. They're going to quit sometime during the winter. In the spring, a good queen will fix most problems. She'll outproduce most of the problems that you'll have in a hive. This time of year, it doesn't matter how good your queen is, she's not going to outproduce any problem. Any little problem you have in a hive has a really good chance of killing that hive before it comes out of the spring. So rather than waiting until you find something wrong and then fixing it, we need to be proactive and keep things from going wrong. And if that means prophylactic treating for mites or for using antibiotics, you know, I make my living with bees, and that's how I pay my bills. I can't afford to take chances on, well, maybe they won't die. If I call the electric company and say, well, maybe my bees won't die, so maybe you'll get paid this year and keep my electricity on, they're probably gonna just go ahead and cut it off right then, figuring that I'm an idiot, you know, I don't need electricity anyway. But, I gotta keep bees alive. Whatever I have to do to keep my bees alive that don't poison everybody, that's associated with them, I wanna do it. And I don't know anybody else that makes their living with bees that don't have the same attitude. You have to. If you have 2 hives sitting out behind the barn, you can play around with them. But, if you're paying your mortgage with it, you can't take chances. You have to be proactive. Yes, sir.
Back in '85, when trichum mites hit, I had like 50 hives. Cave wing hit, paralysis hit, they come crawling out of the hive, laying on the ground, and everything else, nobody knew what to do, and everybody was looking for everything. My point is, now they're pretty much on top of everything before it becomes an epidemic. Back then, nobody was on top of anything. And now, everybody's looking all the time for different things.
Yeah.
They know it's coming before you get it.
Yeah. When all this stuff first comes, nobody knows how to fix it. But, once there's been some people that have been successful fixing it, then, you have some kind of a template to follow. And that's probably the best advice I could give anybody keeping bees. If you're having a problem, and you don't know what to do about it, you find somebody that, keeps their bees healthy and see what they do. If you don't know how to keep your bees mite-free, find somebody that keeps healthy bees and see what they're doing to keep their bees mite-free and copy it. There's no law against, I mean, you can't file a copyright for mite treatment. Copy what somebody else is doing. Take good advice.
Well, I did that one time, killed 25 hives.
Yeah. There you go. You knew that's the wrong guy to ask, didn't you? Yes,
The
ma'am.
only I did.
Can you put would you recommend putting the probiotic in your, like your solid, your patty and stuff over
Sure.
the winter as well?
You can do that. They'll work fine.
You put sugar, powdered sugar too, instead of the syrup.
You can use powdered sugar as long as you're not feeding them all powdered sugar. You can make your own powdered sugar with a blender or a food processor out of cane sugar.
I've been mixing it with powdered sugar, just put them on hot water.
That'll work.
'Cause they-
That works fine.
Feeding the bees.
Well, right now, speaking of feeding the bees, right now bees have plenty of pollen coming in. A lot of different kinds of pollen. Pollen is not all equal. Some pollens are a lot better for bees than others. Bees can digest about 5 different types of amino acids. I've read in some places as many as 7. But there's 5 primary amino acids that they use most of the time. And all pollens don't have those. And the pollens that are available now, most of them are fairly good, pretty good, but not all of them are that great. So if your bees start going backwards, and they're not bringing in any pollen, or check your hives, make sure they got pollen in them, for one thing. A couple of years ago, there was a lot of losses, and nearly all of the hives that you looked at, that I looked at, had very little or no pollen, no bee bread. They consumed everything in there, and it was pretty plain why they died. It wasn't just that they starved. The queen is not going to produce brood without protein. It takes protein to make brood, and without protein, the queen's not going to lay eggs. If she lays eggs, they're going to be cannibalized for the protein in them. So it's kind of an endless circle thing there. And if there's not any pollen in your hives, feed them some pollen substitute. Most of the pollen subs out there now are pretty good. 20 years ago, there was not wasn't that big of a group of pollen subs available. You could get B-Pro, or you can get soy meal and, soy flour and brewer's yeast, and that was about it. But now we have a lot of different pollen subs. Any of the upper echelon are really good. Ultra B is good, Mega B is good, Feed B is okay if you can still find it. But those two, AP 23 is good. All of those are good products. And the bees are attracted to them if they need pollen. If they need protein, they'll be attracted to it. They'll come take it. So if you check your hives and there's not any pollen stored in there, feed them. If the queen has quit laying and there's not any pollen in there, that may be why. Feed them, see if that helps. Don't be afraid to feed your bees. Treat your bees like livestock. You might think that they're like a faithful pet, you know, and want to pet them and all that. That's not going to work too good. They don't appreciate being petted. Treat them like livestock. If it's the middle of June and we run into a drought and the pasture dries up and you have a field full of cattle, even though it's the middle of June, you're going to feed them hay. You're going to feed them. Your bees are the same way. I don't know how many times that I've heard people say, well, there's lots of stuff blooming. If they can't make it, they're just going to have to die. Well, guess what? They will. You'll be satisfied, maybe. But even if there's a bloom out there, that doesn't mean there's anything in it. If it's hot and dry, clover might be blooming, but the clover is putting all its energy into staying alive. It's not putting any energy into making nectar. All the moisture in that plant is going to the leaf, trying to stay alive, the stem and leaf. It's not going to the bloom. The pollen is not going to be any good in hot summer like that because it dries out. Pollen is a living thing. Once it's removed from the bloom, its shelf life is relatively short. If it dries out, the amino acid content's gone. That's why the bees ferment. That's why they add nectar to it, or honey and water, and cause it to ferment, so that it'll hold that protein content. So just check your hives. Don't be afraid to feed them. Yes, sir.
You feed it in like a pollen feeder, or would you put it in dry sugar?
Well, at this time of year, the one thing that I would not want to do is put a pollen patty inside the hive,
That's what I'm thinking.
because you're going to have a small hive beetle mecca if you do that. Yes?
This year I've done something a little bit different than I've ever done. I'm talking about that pollen substitute. Years ago, last year, and even years before, I only fed them when I thought they needed the pollen substitute. And I was always having trouble with a lot of brood going in the winter, you know, training the brood. I got 8-frame hives, and I made pollen substitute available to them all summer long. Like a big toad of it, or a plastic toad, not a big toad. Anyway, it's been out there available to them. There are days that they hit it hard, there are days they don't touch it. But my point is, in 8-frame hive, I got 5 to 7 frames of brood in every hive right now because of it.
Yeah.
And I've noticed a big difference in it.
And it hadn't been that way in past years when he didn't feed.
Right.
Because the queen never slowed down. She always had proteins available. Fresh protein is a lot more attractive than stored protein to bees. The fresh pollen that's coming in is what triggers brood production.
Yeah, but when there wasn't any, it's hot and dry, there's no pollen, they went to the pollen substitute. They still had something to eat.
And for LV's question, I feed it outside the hive.
You don't put it in the sugar patties?
I don't, especially not this time of year. I feed it outside the hive, put it in a 5-gallon bucket, stand 2 pallets up like that, like a TP, or that it can't rain down into the bucket. You put the 5-gallon bucket under them. And if you'll rest the pallets on the bucket, that deters the coons a little bit. It slows them down a little bit. They have to get the whole family there to turn the bucket over rather than just one of them. But, that, you'll be surprised how much the bees will use that. If you keep it out there, it's kind of like Mike was saying. You'll be surprised what a difference it'll make. Yes, sir?
He's talking about that too. Does possums eat live bees or just dead bees? Yeah, they do.
Possums eat everything. They'll eat you if you hold still long enough.
I didn't ask that.
You didn't have to. See, this is an open information forum. They eat live meat.
They'll sit there like a skunk.
Well, sort of, yeah.
So you need to
Skunks.
chase them across the field with a stick?
However you want to do your possums, you do them that way. I have a particular method of dealing with those kind of things at home, and it is not PETA approved. Yeah.
They used to tell them Dr. Remington take care of.
Yeah. Just make sure what's behind the possum, deal with it the way that I deal with it, because, if you come to our barn, you'll see what I mean.
Don't have your wife dealing with the
Yeah,
possum.
it's well ventilated. There's this great big shot pattern in one particular wall of my barn that has this perfect silhouette of a coon there. And my wife asked me why I didn't replace that piece of tin, and I told her that it gave me so much pleasure every time I looked over there and saw it, because I just couldn't replace it. It's not leaking. I mean, it's not causing any damage, and it's a good conversation piece, especially when some touchy-feely kind of person comes there and says, "Oh, you've got holes in your wall." I said, "Yeah, that's where I killed 2 coons." They were trying to eat my chickens. But believe it or not, coons and possums can be predators on honeybees. I've lost a lot of nukes in the past to coons and possums. And they lost more than nukes, but I lost enough nukes that it kind of turned me into a mass murder. But not of humans. But, yeah, to answer Roy's question, possums will eat live bees, they'll eat dead bees. Coons will drag combs. A coon will take the top off of a hive. You know how tight bees stick tops to hives. A coon will take a top off of a hive and pull frames out of it to eat what's in the comb. The dark comb has protein in it. The larval skins, see, the larva sheds its skin 6 times. The bees can only remove about half of that. That's why the comb gets dark. That's why there's no wax in it. The bees have to remove wax to keep the hole the same size for the queen. Eventually, it gets where they can't even do that, and it starts looking like little BB shots, in the comb. And there's very little wax in that. It's all larval skins, cocoons. That's what the coons like to eat. Raccoons like to eat. And they'll pull that out, and they get protein out of it.
Law.
Nothing wrong.
I don't know.
So, coons are nice and cute and furry and all that kind of stuff, but don't think they're your friend if you're a beekeeper. If you cook them right, they're good too. Winter feed, we feed patties. We don't feed any liquid feed in the winter for bees that we keep here in Kentucky. We feed patties on a single hive. We don't winter anything in double deeps if we can help it. We winter in singles with, and if there's not enough bees to fill out a single, we'll put it into a nuke box. The idea is the smallest volume box to accommodate the number of bees that you have. And the smaller the volume, the less likely the bees can get away from the food source. That's what kills bees. when they're healthy. A healthy hive will die if it clusters away from the food source and it turns cold for 3 days. 2 to 3 days of cold weather, 30 degrees or below, where it don't get above 30 degrees for the day. And if they're not clustered within a food source, they'll die. That's when you open a hive up, you find a cluster of bees like that, with heads in the cells and bees in between the frames. That's what happens. And honey that far away, they can't move to it. 30 degrees and they won't move. The cluster can't move, it's static. So, the less volume that you have, the less likely they're going to be able to get away from the food source. If the only food in the hive is a sugar patty right on top of the frames, they'll cluster right up against it. And when the cluster tightens up, when it gets colder, it'll tighten up against that patty. If you have honey in here and the cluster is in that band of honey, if the queen's down here and the cluster tightens up, it'll tighten up away from the food source. And if it gets colder, the cluster gets smaller to conserve heat, and they'll die. You hadn't done anything wrong. Had healthy bees, you got them healthy into the winter, and then you go out there and find 40 pounds of honey on the hive and a dead cluster. That's frustrating, and that's why. There's too much volume in the box. They got away from the food source. But we lose about, if we winter in a double deep, regardless of the size of the cluster going into the winter, if we winter in a double deep, we lose between 25 and 30% of our hive, just to that one cause. If we winter in a single, we lose between 5 and 10% of the hives. And I know that sounds counterintuitive until you read some of the old beekeeping literature, the magazines, Gleanings in Beekeeping. If you can get your hands on some of those from the early 1900s, the argument was about why are we supposed to be wintering in double deeps when the singles have worked so well. Beekeepers used to winter in singles, but somewhere along the line we got trained to winter in doubles. Mike?
December 2nd, you're going to Murfreesboro to talk on some of that stuff.
Yeah.
I just gave a talk over there Saturday on all that. So if you mention any of that, you might get ran off. Murfreesboro.
Anytime I go up north of the Ohio River and get ran off, I count it in honor.
They was completely in disbelief of it. It can be done in a single hive body. I'm forewarning you, if you mention up there, they might run you off.
Not a problem. I'll gladly run back across the river. I wasn't aiming that toward Roy necessarily, but
No, I never said a word.
He was thinking, well,
you have the look. You just have that guilty look. Yes, ma'am.
So how much food are you feeding these singles now that if you're gonna overwinter them that way?
I'll make a sugar patty.
We have your recipe and we know all that, but
Yeah.
I'm saying, how often?
I
is
check
feeding
the hive about every 2 weeks,
Every 2 weeks.
and it's pretty easy to check. You just open the top and look and see if they've eaten up through the sugar patty. If they have, you put more on it. It's pretty simple.
To get to that one brew box, you just pick the 10 best frames out, put your bees in, check out your bees.
Don't leave any brood out, and don't put any honey in. If you have a frame that's all honey and no brood, leave it out. Just put frames with brood and bees in that bottom box. That's all that's necessary. You're probably, and you don't have to do this until November or maybe even December. That actually relieves a lot of stress about this, or it should, because you don't have to be thinking, well, I've got to get my bees ready for winter right now. You can wait until it actually starts, we start having some cold nights. By then, your queen's going to be slowed down enough that you're going to be able to pick out frames to put in that bottom box. shake all the bees off of the other frames. If you have frames honey extracted, more than likely the honey that you extract out of there will pay for the, whatever dead outs that you'll have by bees back.
So it shows you your feed. You can go on and put your queen excluders in, let that brood hatch out,
Yeah.
and move down too.
You can, if you have brood that's still in the hive and you have more than 10 frames of brood, but you're not gonna have more than 10 frames of brood in the end of October or in November. More than likely. It's always possible. But if you have more than 10 frames of brood, sell them. Somebody else. You can also mix. You can mix frames of bees and brood. When there is a nectar source that the bees are working, they'll go to war over a little scrap of food. Or they'll go to war when you put these foragers in with this hive. That it'll start a war. But when there's nothing for the bees to be working, you can swap frames of brood and bees back and forth between hives and they won't even care. You're not going to start a war by doing that. You're also not going to start a war by mixing frames and have open larvae on them. The bees that are on a frame of open larvae are young bees. In the process of taking that frame from this hive to this hive over here, any foragers that are on that frame will leave it. So the bees that are on that frame are not a threat. They're young bees and they'll be accepted in the other hive. So you can mix and match frames to get to the right size hives that you want. And, you know, most of this stuff that I've been talking about, it's mostly a matter of gaining the confidence in what you're doing to go ahead and do it. And once you've actually, you know, decided to make the leap, you'll realize that, well, this is not a big deal. I wonder why more people don't do this. It's because we read books. And all these books are great, and the people that write them are great. But very few of the people that write them actually make their living keeping bees alive. They make their living selling books. But now, I'm not taking anything away from Larry Connor or any of these people, Jim Tudor, any of the people that write these books, because they're great at what they do, and they're really important to the industry. Most people don't realize that Larry Connor was one of the most innovative queen breeders ever in beekeeping. Him and Bud Kale were the creators of the Starline bees. And the Starline bees were the industry standard for commercial pollinators for 30 years. That was a big deal. Starlines and Midnights. And he was in on the creation. He was one of 2 guys that worked on that project. So, you know, whatever you think of Larry Connor, he deserves a little credit for that. And the rest of these guys do too.
I do a lot with Ernest and Tiffany do. That's what I do.
Well, you're out of luck. Yeah. You're spiraling down the drain. Yes, ma'am.
So when you said to put your brood in the single D, what if you have like a frame of pollen? Don't put that in there either?
If you put pollen in there, put it against the outside wall. It's okay to put it in there as an insulator, just in case the bees happen to need some protein. But the truth of the matter is, coming out of winter or even in winter, the bees aren't going to access that bee bread. Very seldom. If you have a frame of pollen in the spring, chances are not that great that the bees will ever consume it. Because when fresh stuff starts coming in, it's like, well, this is last year's crop. I'm not eating that stuff.
So I've got a frame of pollen in there right now. Chances are that won't be used.
They might be used between now and December, but it won't be used. Chances are really good it won't be used between December and March. But they will take fresh pollen sub or fresh pollen. You'll see bees, you know, you'll see hives that have frames full of bee bread that are bringing in dandelion pollen or maple pollen in January, February, or willow pollen. But why would they be risking a foraging flight and bringing in pollen when they got these frames full of bee bread? They don't want the bee bread, they want fresh pollen. A frame full, a pollen-bound hive is probably the most useless thing that you could have in a bee yard.
Will they not drag it out so they
Nope.
reuse itself?
Now, I hadn't trained any of mine to do that yet. The bees won't clean out the pollen. They'll eat it, but if they don't want to eat it, they won't clean it out. They won't clean out frames of pollen. And there's not any easy way to do it. I've heard of people that tried to wash it out. That usually wound up making a really big mess and frustrating the beekeeper and turning the comb up. Yes, ma'am.
You know when, in the spring, when to put your second box back on?
Soon as we start having fresh pollen come in, you can put your second box back on. March. You'll have pollen coming in February too, but they're not gonna be built up enough to go up into that second box until March. Mid-March is a good, if you were just taking a general calendar date of when to put a second story on, mid-March would be a good general date to do it. Let them work down into that first box and start filling that first box. It's gonna be pretty empty by mid-March or by February. And let them start filling that and before you put a second box on.
Ken, does it matter whether it's a solid bottom board or screen bottom?
Does it matter if it's a solid bottom or screen bottom? I've been able to kill bees equally well with either one. No, it really don't. I use just about all solid bottoms, but that's just because they're on pallets. And pallets with screen bottoms you gotta be way more particular moving them with a loader than I am. I'm not that particular with them, and they just don't work well for me. But screen bottoms are okay. If you have a screen bottom, make sure that wind can't get under your hive. Wind going under the hive with a screen bottom creates a Venturi effect, and it'll pull the heat out of the hive, pull the heat away from the cluster. It's not a guarantee it's going to kill your bees or anything, but it does make the hive more trouble to heat, to keep the cluster warm. So try to keep wind going under. Yes, sir.
Can you just wait till the bees move up in that upper deep to take the bottom one out from under?
Sure. Yeah.
How late in the fall do you think that would be, or how cold should you not do it?
It don't get too cold to do it.
Okay.
But how late in the fall should you wait to, if the bees happen to all move up into the second story, you can just reverse them, only leave the second one off. You know, you can just take the bottom one out.
Well, that's what I was gonna do, take the bottom one out.
Yeah, that works fine. That'll work fine. But what you want to try to stay away from is periods that you're going to have more than 3 days of under 30-degree weather. That's what you need to stay focused on. And you want to have the bees prepared for that before it gets there. I mean, don't be watching the weather and say, well, I better go out and move all those bees in one box tonight. It's going to get cold for 3 days. That you need to do that looking ahead, knowing what it does at that time of year every year. Every year we have a cold snap in the middle of December, so we better do this in November around Thanksgiving. We better do this at Halloween, whatever.
If you do, you just have to start feeding from that point. I mean,
Yeah.
however early you
That's
do
right.
it, you just
And
start feeding
that
them.
sugar padding, it's great for a winter feed, It's also good if you have a small hive that needs feed, and you have other big hives, that if you put syrup on it, they'll rob it to death and kill it. If you put that sugar patty on there, the small hive will stay alive, and the big hives won't rob it. Bees don't rob solids, they rob liquid. Larry said I can't talk anymore. I'll answer your question though.
I put a solid sugar patty on top of mine. Should I have any ventilation? I'm talking
No.
about no ventilation.
No ventilation. The idea of a solid sugar patty is that you cut off all the ventilation so that you want the condensation from the bees breathing to catch in that sugar patty to make it soft enough that the bees can eat it. So the sugar patty is serving more than one service for one purpose. It's acting as a food. It's also acting to catch the condensation, or that ventilation, you don't have to worry about ventilation at all. In fact, in that case, the less ventilation, the better. But don't let them run out of sugar. You don't want a hole to come in the middle of that pollen patty, because then condensation will go up and come back down through that hole.
Will you quickly do the sugar patty recipe, please?
25 pounds of sugar.
Is that really what you do? I can stop sugar. Go ahead.
Yeah, 25 pounds of sugar, 1 quart of apple cider vinegar, 3 tablespoons of powdered citric acid, and 3 tablespoons of Honeybee Healthy.
One more time.
25 pounds of sugar, 1 quart of apple cider vinegar, 3 tablespoons of powdered citric acid, and 3 tablespoons of Honeybee Healthy.
And you don't put probiotic in that yourself? But we
Uh,
could if we want to?
It's good to have probiotic in it. I don't put it in there. It's not gonna hurt a thing. In fact, it would be good to put it in there. But that's just part of it being cheap. So, sir,